I'm Emily Carter, but everyone calls me Em or Emmy. Nobody ever called me the Star. That title belonged to Sarah, my sister, 8 years my senior. We grew up in Lincoln Park, Chicago, in a house where every corner felt like a gallery of Sarah's achievements. Her smiling photos, certificates, sports medals, all meticulously framed, while I was just a faint shadow, quietly wearing her hand-me-downs and playing with toys she'd outgrown. I got used to it, used to staying silent, never making a fuss. But everything changed one morning at O'Hare Airport when I stood at the check-in counter, clutching a plane ticket not to Miami with my family, but to Maui alone. I sent a text to my mom. "I'm not going with you. I'm choosing myself." Then I turned off my phone, my heart pounding, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I could truly breathe. My family would call me selfish, ungrateful, the one who ruined their big vacation. They'd recount how Sarah sobbed, how Mom screamed through voicemails, how Dad shook his head in disappointment. But they didn't see the years I lived for them. For Sarah, for her twin toddlers, for their endless demands. I used to think family was everything, that I had to sacrifice my dreams to fulfill duty. I worked myself to exhaustion at an Italian diner to pay for college, babysat until I had no life of my own, and even my first getaway to Lake Michigan turned into a disaster when they showed up unannounced and thrust me back into the nanny role. I tried, I really did, but at some point I asked myself, what about me? Where's my life? The moment I sent that text, I knew I'd changed everything. I wasn't just skipping a flight. I was leaving behind years of letting others define me. Was I wrong to choose myself? Or was this the first time I truly lived? Hear my story because it might just be yours too. I'm Emily Carter, but most folks call me Em or Emmy. Nobody calls me Betty, though some friends tease me with it sometimes. I'm not fond of that name. It sounds like some old auntie in a black and white movie. I grew up in Lincoln Park, Chicago, in a 3-story townhouse with a white picket fence and a tidy little garden my mom, Linda, tended to daily. Sounds like a typical family, right? My dad, Robert, was an accountant for a small firm. My mom was an elementary school teacher, always busy with craft projects for her students. Then there was my sister Sarah, 8 years older than me. And that's where things started to veer off track. Our house was like a gallery dedicated to Sarah. Every wall was adorned with her pictures, her first smile, her first steps, a scribbled drawing my parents treasured like a Picasso. Honor roll certificates, track medals, even a glossy photo of Sarah in her dazzling prom dress, all carefully framed and polished to a shine. Me? Well, if you looked hard enough, you might find a blurry snapshot of me tucked in a corner, probably one where I'm standing behind Sarah, trying to smile while no one noticed. I got used to living in Sarah's shadow. The clothes I wore were her hand-me-downs, often too big or worn at the shoulders. My toys were the ones she'd grown bored of. A doll missing an arm, a puzzle set with pieces gone astray. I didn't complain, honest. When you grow up in a house where every glance is fixed on someone else, you learn to stay quiet, to not make a scene. I thought it was normal that every little sister lived like this. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I knew I wasn't seen, wasn't heard, wasn't valued. Sarah was the family's shining star. She was smart, beautiful, and had a knack for making people adore her. At school, she was the track team captain, valedictorian, always surrounded by a gaggle of friends. My parents never missed one of Sarah's meets. They sat in the front row, clapped the loudest, and bragged to neighbors about their perfect daughter. I was different. I did okay in school, but not stellar. I loved drawing, but no one hung my pictures on the wall. I had a few friends, but I never dared invite them over, scared they'd see how dim I was next to Sarah's glow. I remember one time when I was 10, I tried telling my mom about a drawing I made in class. A cat curled up in the sunlight. I was so excited, holding it up, but she barely glanced at it, saying, "That's nice, Emmy," before turning to ask Sarah about her upcoming speech. I stood there, still holding the picture, feeling like I'd turned invisible. I didn't cry. I just folded the drawing, slipped it into my backpack, and told myself I wouldn't share again. But that doesn't mean I resented Sarah. She didn't mean to make me feel unseen. Sarah was kind to me in her way, sharing candy, telling school stories, even helping with homework sometimes. But even her kindness was a reminder I was always the little sister, basking in the light she cast. And my parents, they didn't realize what they were doing. They loved me, I know that. But their love came with strings. That I stand back, wait my turn, put Sarah first. Looking back now, I see how those years shaped me. They taught me to live without attention, to bottle up feelings, to smile even when my heart was cracking. But they also planted a small spark, a yearning to be seen, to be heard, to live for myself. And that spark, however faint, smoldered quietly, waiting for the day it would ignite. I still remember the day Sarah swept into that upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago, where my parents had reserved a table to celebrate her 25th birthday. It was a crisp fall evening, the air cool and the city's skyscraper lights shimmered on the Chicago River. I sat at the corner of the table, quietly sipping soda while the family buzzed around Sarah. She wore a striking red dress, her hair swept up, looking like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Then, mid-laughter, Sarah stood, tapped her wine glass, and announced with a radiant smile, "Mom, Dad, Em, everyone, Michael just proposed. I'm getting married." You'd think she'd announced winning the lottery or curing cancer, the way my mom burst into tears and my dad shot up, hugging her tight, shouting, "My girl, that's incredible." The whole restaurant seemed to explode. The waiter clapped, diners at nearby tables turned to offer congratulations, and Sarah stood there, glowing like a star at the center of the universe. And me? I sat there, forcing a smile, trying to clap along but feeling like a rock was pressing on my chest. It wasn't that I wasn't happy for Sarah. She deserved joy. I knew that. But in that moment, I felt invisible, like I was just a prop in someone else's party. "Emmy, you'll be a bridesmaid, right?" Sarah turned to me, her eyes sparkling. I nodded, saying, "Of course, sis." But my voice was so soft, I wondered if she even heard. Probably not, because right after, Mom pulled her into another hug, and the family dove into talk of wedding dresses, flowers, and venues. Weeks later, I started overhearing hushed conversations between my parents in the kitchen. One night, while I did homework in the living room, I caught Dad's tense voice. "We'll need a big loan, Linda. But this is Sarah's big day. We can't let her down." Mom sighed, replying, "I know, but she's our daughter. We have to make it perfect." They decided to hold the wedding at the Peninsula Hotel, a place so fancy just hearing the name screamed extravagance. I wanted to barge in to yell that this was insane, that they were plunging us into debt for one day. But I stayed silent, as always. My opinion never carried weight in this house. The wedding day arrived, and Sarah looked like a princess straight out of a fairy tale. The hotel was decked out in white roses and sparkling crystal lights. My parents stood front and center, eyes gleaming with pride, snapping photos like they feared missing a single second of Sarah. I stood among the bridesmaids, wearing a silver dress Mom picked, feeling like a ghost no one noticed. Throughout the reception, I tried to blend in, smiling at guests, toasting the couple, but no one asked how I felt. No one saw me slip away to sit alone in a corner, watching everyone dance. I wondered if anyone would notice if I vanished entirely. That wedding wasn't just a day. It was a harsh reminder that in this family, Sarah was the sun, and I was just a dim backdrop. My parents poured their heart, money, and love into her, leaving me with scraps of attention. But even as my heart sank, I said nothing. I was used to keeping it all inside, used to smiling while breaking within. Yet deep down, I started feeling a faint spark, a restlessness, a yearning to be seen. I didn't know that spark would soon ignite, changing everything. The wedding was months ago, but our Lincoln Park house still felt like it was basking in its afterglow. My mom, Linda, pulled out the wedding album every weekend, her eyes sparkling as she pointed to each photo of Sarah in her dazzling white gown. My dad, Robert, kept retelling how choked up he got walking Sarah down the aisle. I, Emmy, just sat there, sipping coffee, nodding and smiling like a polite spectator. But one Sunday evening, Sarah waltzed in with a secretive grin, trailing her new husband Michael, and dropped another bombshell. "Mom, Dad, Emmy," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "I've got big news. I'm quitting my job at the bank. I'm going to be a stay-at-home wife. Michael makes enough for both of us, so I want to focus on family." I nearly dropped the plate I was holding. A housewife. Sarah, who used to brag about her manager title, now wanted to stay home and... what? Cook and mop floors. Mom glanced at Dad, and they both forced tight smiles. "Oh, that's wonderful, honey," Mom said, but I saw worry in her eyes. Dad nodded, adding, "If that's what you want, Sarah." I wanted to scream. They'd just taken out a huge loan for the wedding, and now Sarah was ditching her career? But no one said anything beyond hollow congratulations. I bit my lip, pushing cold cuts around my plate, trying to stay silent like always. Then, weeks later, Sarah dropped a second bombshell. She was pregnant, not with one baby, but twins. My parents lost it with joy. "Twins," Dad kept repeating, shaking his head in disbelief. Mom hugged Sarah, tears streaming, calling it a family miracle. But that miracle came with a steep price. One night, as I studied in my room, I overheard my parents whispering in the living room. "We have to help Sarah and Michael buy a house," Mom said, her voice firm. "With twins, they'll need more space. There's a nice place in Evanston, not far." Dad sighed. "Linda, we just sold the inherited land to cover the wedding debt. Another loan now?" Mom replied, "She's our daughter, Robert. We have to do this." I couldn't believe it. They were ready to sink the family deeper into debt for Sarah's new house, when I didn't even dare dream of attending a decent college, knowing they couldn't afford it. This time, I couldn't stay quiet. I stormed into the living room, heart pounding. "Mom, Dad, are you serious?" I said, my voice shaking but resolute. "You just borrowed for the wedding, and now you're buying Sarah a house. This is crazy." They stared at me, startled, as if they'd forgotten I was in the house. Mom frowned, her tone stern. "Emmy, this is what families do. We help each other. Sarah needs a place for the kids." Dad nodded, adding, "You wouldn't understand, Emmy. It's responsibility." Responsibility? I wanted to yell that "what about me? What about my dreams, my future?" But I just stood there, fists clenched, feeling like the world was crushing my chest. I turned back to my room, slamming the door, and for the first time, I felt real anger. Not at Sarah, she was just living her life, but at my parents, at how they put her above everything, at myself for staying silent too long. I looked in the mirror on my desk, seeing a tired, invisible girl, and wondered if I'd ever live for myself. That anger, though small, was a new flame. It burned quietly, and I knew sooner or later it would blaze. Sarah and Michael had settled into their new Evanston home, and my parents, Linda and Robert, couldn't have been happier. They spent weekends there, snapping photos of the soon-to-arrive twins, discussing furniture for the house they'd poured their savings into securing. Meanwhile, I, Emmy, sat in my cramped room in Lincoln Park, Chicago, flipping through college admissions packets, trying to find a school I could afford. I was 18, fresh out of high school, and for the first time, I thought I might have a chance to shine, to have my parents see me, not just Sarah's shadow. I was wrong. One evening, I mustered all my courage and stepped into the kitchen where Mom was poring over Sarah's wedding album for the 100th time. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "I'm looking at colleges. I want to study marketing, but tuition's steep. Could you help me out?" Mom looked up, but her eyes seemed to drift elsewhere, as if she was thinking of something else. Dad cleared his throat, exchanging a glance with her, the kind I knew too well, the one that said they were about to say no. "Emmy, sweetheart," Mom began, her tone sweet but detached. "We'd love to help, but with the wedding loan and the house down payment, we can only cover half your tuition. You'll have to figure out the rest." Dad nodded, adding, "You're smart, Emmy. You'll find a way." I stood there feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Half. After everything they'd done for Sarah, the lavish wedding, the new house, they were giving me half. I nodded, mumbled thanks, and retreated to my room. The door shut, and I slid to the floor, back against the wall, and for the first time in years, I cried. Not loud sobs, not a wail, but quiet, burning tears, as if every disappointment, every time I'd been overlooked, came pouring out at once. I didn't want to fight, didn't want to make a scene, but inside, I was screaming, "Why not me? Why am I always the one who sacrifices?" In the end, I chose City Colleges of Chicago not because it was my dream, but because it was the only place I could afford. With the little money my parents gave and a small student loan, I scraped by for tuition. But rent, books, and food? I landed a waitressing job at an Italian diner in Little Italy, a few blocks from campus. Every day I rushed from class to the diner, tied on an apron, smiled at customers, carried heavy trays of pasta, and fielded complaints about cold food. Some nights I stumbled into my cheap rental apartment at midnight, feet aching, head spinning with undone assignments. I collapsed onto my bed, staring at the stained ceiling, wondering if I could keep going. Those first months of college were a nightmare. I studied, worked, slept, and repeated with no time for friends, no time to breathe. But the worst pain wasn't the exhaustion. Every call home, Mom only asked about Sarah and the twins, as if I didn't exist. Once I tried telling her about a presentation I aced, but she cut me off. "Oh, Emmy, Sarah just got a double stroller for the babies. It's so cute." I hung up, feeling like I'd been erased. But even in those dark days, I didn't give up. Every extra shift, every late night study session, I told myself I was building my own future. I didn't have my parents cheering me on, no one clapping for me, but I had myself. And for the first time, I realized that might just be enough. Ethan and Noah, Sarah's twin boys, were born to the family's boundless joy. My parents, Linda and Robert, practically moved to Evanston to dote on the two, snapping photos of every moment, from their first blinks to their yawning stretches. Sarah and Michael beamed, posting their kids on social media like they'd birthed two angels. I, Emmy, loved those little guys too. Honest, their big round eyes and gummy smiles could melt anything. But loving them didn't mean I wanted to be their full-time nanny, especially while I was drowning in college and work in Chicago. It started one Friday night when I dragged myself back to my tiny Little Italy apartment after an 8-hour waitressing shift. My feet throbbed, my head spun with untouched marketing homework. All I wanted was a hot shower and to crash. But when I opened the door, there was Sarah on my couch, the 4-year-old twins tearing around the room, shrieking like mini tornadoes. "Emmy, thank God you're here," Sarah chirped, jumping up, purse already slung over her shoulder. "I'm late for a spa date with friends. Michael and I need some downtime. You'll watch Ethan and Noah for a bit, right?" Before I could say a word, she blew kisses at the boys and vanished out the door, leaving me frozen, keys still in hand. I stared at Ethan and Noah, now attempting to climb the dining table, and muttered, "Seriously? I wasn't a babysitter, not a maid, but Sarah acted like it was a given. Mom made it worse. When I called to vent, she just said, 'Emmy, Sarah's exhausted. Raising 2 kids isn't easy. This is what families do.'" Family. I wanted to scream that I had a life too, with classes, shifts that drained me, assignments piling up. But Mom didn't listen, and Dad just echoed the usual line, "You've got to help your sister." It quickly became routine. Every weekend, Sarah breezed in like a gust of wind, dropped off Ethan and Noah, and bolted for spa trips, movies, or just me time. Once she stayed 10 minutes, just long enough to complain about how tired she was, then left. I scrambled to keep the twins from scribbling on walls, spilling milk on the floor, or bickering until they screamed. One night, after finally getting them to sleep, I sank to the floor, staring at my trashed apartment, feeling like I was about to break. I had no time for friends, no time for dating, barely time to shower without their yells interrupting. I tried talking to Sarah, tried explaining I was stretched thin. She just laughed, patted my shoulder, and said, "You're doing great, Emmy. I don't know what I'd do without you." When Mom told me, "This is how you learn to be a mom someday." A mom. I wasn't sure I'd survive the week. One time I snapped, yelling at Mom over the phone, "I'm done. I've got school, work. I can't be a free nanny forever." She sighed, her voice stern. "Emmy, don't be selfish. Sarah needs you." I hung up, hands shaking, feeling like the world was pinning me down. That night, I looked in the mirror, hair a mess, eyes shadowed, and asked who I was living for. I loved Ethan and Noah, but I wasn't their mother. I loved my family, but I needed to live too. The anger in me, that small flame I'd tried to smother, was now burning brighter. I didn't know where it would take me, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep going like this. I was spent, truly. Between waitressing shifts in Little Italy, late nights cramming for city colleges of Chicago, and weekends reluctantly babysitting Ethan and Noah, I felt like a machine running on fumes. I needed a break. A place to breathe, to remember I was still Emmy, not just a cog serving my family. So, I decided to treat myself to a short getaway. I found a cheap Airbnb in Saugatuck, right by Lake Michigan, not too far from Chicago. Just thinking about lying on the sand, listening to waves, free from homework, complaining customers, and screaming kids, I felt lighter. I scraped together every tip I earned to book it, and when I told my parents, I nearly fell over when they actually supported me. "Good for you, Emmy," Dad said, clapping my shoulder. "You deserve a rest." Mom smiled, adding, "Go enjoy yourself, sweetie." I was stunned. For once, I felt like they cared about me. The day I left, I was practically skipping. I stuffed clothes into a backpack, hopped on a bus, and with every mile away from Chicago, my heart lifted. Arriving in Saugatuck, I filled my lungs with the salty lake breeze. My Airbnb was small, a bit worn but had a window overlooking the lake, and that was all I needed. I kicked off my shoes, ran to the beach, let the waves lap at my feet. I ate lunch at a little seaside joint, savoring a fish sandwich, and for the first time in months, I felt alive, not just surviving. I dreamed of a quiet evening, reading, listening to waves with no one to bother me. But when I returned to the cottage late that afternoon, I heard familiar laughter. My heart sank. In the front yard, right next to my Airbnb, were my mom, Sarah, and the twins, Ethan and Noah, racing around like mini whirlwinds. "Surprise, Emmy!" Mom cheered, arms wide like she'd handed me a grand gift. "We couldn't let you vacation alone, so we all came." Sarah grinned, pointing to the house next door, a bigger, fancier place, clearly pricier than mine. Before I could speak, Sarah nudged Ethan and Noah toward me. "These guys are dying to hit the beach. Watch them for a bit, okay? I need a walk and Mom's running to the store." They vanished, leaving me standing there, holding hands with two rambunctious boys, my head spinning. My vacation turned into a disaster. Ethan and Noah were like twin storms, barging into my Airbnb, yanking down curtains, breaking a glass, and somehow dumping a box of cereal on my bed. I chased them yelling, trying to stop further chaos, but it was futile. The low point came when Noah stuffed an apple down the toilet, clogging it completely. I had to call a plumber, shelling out money I didn't have, while Sarah returned, whining she was so tired from her walk. I wanted to scream to say this was my vacation, not theirs, but I gritted my teeth and did what they expected, as always. By the weekend's end, I was more exhausted than before. When Sarah complained I wasn't fun with the kids, something in me snapped. I looked at her, at Mom, at their lavish rental next door, and realized they'd never see me. Not Emmy, just a free babysitter. I rode the bus back to Chicago watching Lake Michigan fade, a burning resentment searing inside. I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change, and this time, I'd be the one to decide. The Michigan Lake getaway shattered any hope I had for a moment of peace. I returned to Chicago on the bus, watching the city lights flicker through the window, but inside, I was seething with resentment and exhaustion. I, Emmy, was no longer the quiet girl who accepted everything. My small Little Italy apartment greeted me with its familiar silence, but it couldn't calm the storm in my head. I knew I had to do something to change, or I'd forever be my family's unpaid servant, forever invisible in their eyes. But confronting my parents, Sarah, it wasn't easy. I'd spent my life staying silent, smiling through a breaking heart. This time, I couldn't do it anymore. It all erupted one Saturday night when I stumbled home from a waitressing shift. I was peeling off my apron, dreaming of sleep, when the door flew open. My mom, Linda, stormed in, face flushed with anger, followed by Dad, Robert, with that familiar, disappointed glare. "Emmy, what do you think you're doing?" Mom shouted, her voice sharp as a blade. "You abandon us in Saugatuck, leaving Sarah and the kids to fend for themselves. Do you know how hard that was?" I froze, still clutching my apron, unable to believe what I heard. I abandoned them? Me, who paid for the plumber, cleaned up Ethan and Noah's mess, while they hijacked my vacation. "Mom, that was my getaway," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I didn't invite you. I just wanted a few days for myself." Mom cut me off, pointing at me. "Don't be selfish, Emmy. Family helps each other. Sarah's exhausted. The kids need you." Dad chimed in, his voice low but heavy. "You're ungrateful. After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" It felt like a slap. All they've done? Like paying half my tuition while pouring a fortune into Sarah's wedding and house. Like turning me into an unpaid nanny. I couldn't hold back. "What about me?" I yelled, tears spilling over. "When do you ever think of me? I work myself to death, study until I'm drained, babysit until I have no life left. I'm not Sarah's maid." Mom stood stunned, Dad's face reddened, but they didn't stop. "If you're going to be this selfish, don't expect us to keep paying your tuition," Dad snapped. "You'll figure it out yourself." I stared at them, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and saw how estranged they were. "Fine," I said, my voice icy. "I'd rather scrape by on my own than live like this." I turned to my room, threw clothes into a suitcase, ignoring Mom's screams about me being a family traitor. I dragged the suitcase to the door, not looking back, though my heart twisted as I heard her call, "If you leave, don't come back." I had no clear plan, just knew I had to go. I called Mia, a classmate, and she let me crash on her Wicker Park Apartments couch. The days after were a whirlwind. I picked up extra shifts at the diner, hunted for cheap housing, and finally, Mia and I rented a tiny place in Wicker Park with creaky wood floors and a cramped kitchen. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. For the first time, I felt a spark of freedom, despite the loneliness and nights worrying about bills. I knew the road ahead would be rough, but lying on a thin mattress in my new room, I smiled. I'd stepped out of Sarah's shadow, out of my family's grip. I'd chosen myself. Leaving the Lincoln Park house was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the truest. I, Emmy, stepped out from Sarah's shadow, from my parents' grip, and for the first time, I could breathe. Those early days in Wicker Park, crashing on Mia's couch, weren't easy. I worked like mad at the Italian diner, hauling heavy trays of pasta, smiling at customers despite aching feet, just to afford our shared apartment. That tiny place had creaky wood floors and a kitchen barely big enough for one person. But when I hung my own painting, a cat curled up in sunlight, on the wall, I smiled. This was my home, not Sarah's, not my parents'. For the first time, I had a space that was mine. College was still a grind. City Colleges of Chicago wasn't my dream school, but I dove into it like it was my last shot. I stayed up late on assignments, saw arts, rushed from classes to shifts, and some nights I got just 3 hours of sleep. My parents stopped paying tuition, so I leaned on student loans and meager tips. But every A I earned, every presentation I nailed, made me feel like I was building something, a future no one could take away. When I walked across the stage to receive my marketing degree, I scanned the bleachers, a foolish hope flickering that Mom, Dad, or Sarah might be there. The seats were empty. I swallowed my tears, smiled for myself, and thought, "You did it, Emmy." After graduation, I sent out resumes everywhere, and luck finally grinned at me. A downtown Chicago ad agency called me for an interview. I wore a cheap navy dress, trying not to shake as I pitched a campaign idea. They liked me, and a week later, I had a job. A real job. With my own desk and a name badge. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to rent a small apartment in Logan Square with a window overlooking a park. I bought a proper bed, no more thin mattress on the floor, and felt like I'd conquered the world. For the first time, I had room to live, not just survive. I joined a neighborhood book club debating novels with strangers who became friends. I went on dates, not serious ones, but enough to laugh and feel young, free. I jogged along the Chicago River at dawn, music in my ears, and painted on weekends. I wasn't the drained girl running after family demands anymore. I was Emmy, with dreams, a life, and for the first time, I loved myself. My parents and Sarah were still out there, but we rarely spoke. Brief calls, a few awkward minutes, laced with unspoken resentment. They were still mad I'd left for betraying the family. I didn't argue, just quietly hung up. I knew they wouldn't change, but I also knew I couldn't go back to that old life. My little apartment, my job, those morning runs, they were pieces of a new life. And when I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw the invisible girl. I saw a strong woman ready for whatever lay ahead. I didn't know the biggest challenge was waiting. Just before my 27th birthday, I'd built a new life in Logan Square, Chicago with my advertising job, morning jogs, and book club friends. But my family, Mom, Dad, Sarah, and the looming shadow of family duty still lingered like an old song that wouldn't fade. I, Emmy, thought I'd broken free, but a week before my 27th birthday, Mom called. Her voice was unusually sweet. "Emmy, we want to throw you a birthday party," she said. "The whole family's coming, and we've got a big surprise." I was skeptical, but agreed to visit their Lincoln Park house. Walking in, I found the entire clan: Sarah, Michael, Ethan, Noah, aunts, uncles, all clapping, shouting, "Happy birthday, Emmy!" I smiled, accepted hugs, but inside, I braced for the shock. The shock came when Mom handed me an envelope, eyes twinkling. "This is from all of us," she said. I opened it, my heart sinking as I saw a plane ticket to a Miami, Florida resort. "We're going on a family vacation," Dad declared, voice proud. "All expenses paid." Sarah chimed in, "The kids will love the beach, right, Emmy?" I looked around at their smiling faces and saw the old script. This wasn't a vacation for me. It was a week of babysitting Ethan and Noah while Sarah and Michael relaxed, and my parents soaked up family time. Mom squeezed my hand, whispering, "Don't make a scene in front of everyone." I nodded, thanked them, but in my head I was already plotting something else. I couldn't let history repeat itself, not after the Michigan Lake disaster. I secretly bought a ticket to Maui, Hawaii, using savings from my job. On departure day, I arrived at O'Hare Airport, pulling my suitcase through the chaotic crowd. Sarah and Michael were busy with Ethan and Noah. Mom was babbling about the Miami resort, and no one asked what I wanted. They assumed I'd fall in line, as always. As the family queued for check-in, I faked a stomachache, saying, "I need the restroom. Go ahead and check in. I'll meet you at the gate." They nodded, distracted by luggage and the boys shouting. I turned, heart pounding, and headed straight to another check-in counter. I handed over my passport and Maui ticket, feeling like I was stepping into a new world. On the plane, I turned on my phone briefly. It blew up with texts and voicemails. Mom screamed through the phone, "Emmy, where are you? You've ruined everything. Sarah's crying. The kids are heartbroken." Sarah texted, "How could you do this to our family?" I switched it off, sipped orange juice, and watched clouds drift past the window. A twinge of guilt lingered, but it was drowned out by freedom. In Maui, I sprawled on the beach, warm sand under my feet, waves murmuring. I surfed, dined under stars, chatted with strangers at a bar. No homework, no shifts, no screams. Just me, Emmy, living for myself. As the plane touched down in Hawaii, I knew I'd burned the bridge with my family. They'd call me selfish, ungrateful, but I didn't care anymore. I'd chosen myself, and for the first time, I felt truly alive. I didn't know what awaited me back in Chicago, but I knew one thing. I'd never return to that old life where I was just a shadow. The Maui getaway was the medicine I needed. I returned to Chicago with a sun-kissed glow, a lighter spirit, and a confidence I'd never known. But I, Emmy, knew the real world was waiting, and my family wouldn't let my bombshell at O'Hare Airport slide. I'd barely dragged my suitcase into my Logan Square apartment, shoes still on, when the doorbell buzzed frantically. I opened it to find my mom, Linda, face flushed with fury, and Sarah, eyes swollen like she'd cried all day. They barged in uninvited, and before I could speak, Mom shouted, "Emmy, what do you think you're doing? You ruined our family vacation. Sarah's devastated, the kids are crushed, and we spent so much on your ticket." Sarah cut in, voice trembling. "How could you be so selfish? Don't you love the twins at all?" I stood in my tiny apartment, absorbing their barrage of accusations. They called me ungrateful, said I'd destroyed family spirit, even demanded I repay the unused ticket. Part of me wanted to apologize, to smooth things over like I always had, but I wasn't that Emmy anymore, the girl who bowed her head and stayed quiet. I took a deep breath, looked straight at Mom and Sarah, and said, my voice calm but razor sharp, "Enough. I don't owe anyone anything. Not money, not time, not babysitting. I'm an adult, and I have the right to live my life." Mom's jaw dropped. Sarah froze, but I wasn't done. My whole life, I've stood behind Sarah, doing what everyone wanted. I'm done. If you can't respect me, we have nothing to say. They tried to interrupt, Mom yelling I was betraying the family, Sarah sobbing that I didn't love her. But I raised my hand, cutting them off. "I love you, but not the old way anymore. If you want to talk, treat me as an equal, not a servant. Now, please leave." I opened the door, standing tall, heart pounding but head held high. They stared, too shocked to speak, then turned away, muttering accusations as they left. The door shut and I leaned against the wall, exhaling a long breath. It wasn't easy, but for the first time, I felt truly powerful. After that day, I vowed to protect my peace. I moved to a new apartment in Andersonville, keeping the address from my family. The small place with big windows and a corner for my paintings was my private haven. I threw myself into my advertising job, earning praise from my boss, and started running marathons, feeling strength in every stride. I learned Spanish, joined a yoga class, and every night, returning to my quiet apartment, I smiled. No more Ethan and Noah's screams, no more Sarah's endless demands, no more disappointed glares from my parents. Just me, Emmy, living true to myself. I don't know if my family will change, if we'll ever talk without fighting. But I know I did the right thing. I chose myself, not out of selfishness, but because I deserve to live, to be loved, to be seen. And as I look out my window, watching Chicago's lights twinkle, I know I'll never go back to being that old shadow. Life in Andersonville was a quiet dream. My small apartment, with its big windows overlooking green trees, was where I, Emmy, found myself through morning painting sessions and evenings learning Spanish. My advertising job in downtown Chicago was thriving, and I'd just finished a marathon, feeling like I could conquer the world. My family, Mom, Dad, Sarah, Ethan, Noah, had faded into distant memories, surfacing only in brief, reproachful texts. I thought I'd close that door for good, but one afternoon, as I brewed coffee, an email from Sarah popped into my inbox. I hesitated, my heart tightening, but opened it anyway. "Emmy," she wrote, "I'm sorry. I leaned on you too much, never considering your feelings. Ethan and Noah turn 5 soon, and they miss their Aunt Emmy. I'd love for you to come to their birthday party at Grant Park. No expectations, just please come." I sank into a chair, rereading it 3 times, hardly believing it. Sarah apologizing. The sister who always assumed I owed the family everything, now admitting she was wrong. I wanted to brush it off, to keep my safe distance, but part of me missed Ethan and Noah. Their giggles, how they'd call Aunt Emmy while clinging to my legs. I missed feeling like part of a family, even just a little. I replied, but not impulsively. "Sarah, I'll come," I wrote, but as their aunt, not a babysitter. "If I feel pushed, I'm leaving." I hit send, heart racing, wondering if I was reopening a dangerous door. On the birthday, I arrived at Grant Park carrying small gifts for Ethan and Noah, superhero picture books I knew they'd love. The park buzzed with balloons, children's laughter, and the scent of cake drifting in the breeze. Sarah ran over, hugging me tighter than I expected. "Thank you for coming," she said, eyes slightly red. Mom and Dad stood there, offering awkward smiles, but didn't mention Miami or our old fights. The party went smoothly. Ethan and Noah squealed opening their gifts, dragging me into a game of tag around the park. Sarah and Michael were busy with guests, but not once did they shove the twins at me to watch. Mom talked about her new students. Dad asked about my job, simple questions. But for the first time, I felt they were actually listening. As I left, Sarah held my hand, whispering, "I'll try, Emmy. I want to be a better sister." I nodded, making no promises, but inside, I felt a flicker of hope. I'm not naive. My family might not change completely, and I won't fall back into old traps. But that day, I realized reconciliation doesn't mean sacrificing myself. I can love Ethan and Noah, even Sarah, Mom, and Dad, but on my terms, with clear boundaries. Back in my apartment, I opened the window, letting Chicago's breeze sweep in, and smiled. I was still Emmy, free and strong, but now I knew I could open my heart when I chose to. Life in Andersonville had settled into a rhythm I, Emmy, cherished. I woke each morning, brewed coffee, painted by the window, then jogged through the park before heading to my advertising job in downtown Chicago. Work was going strong, with campaigns earning my boss's praise, and I'd just finished a beginner's Spanish course, confident enough to order food at restaurants without stumbling. My family, Mom, Dad, Sarah, Ethan, Noah, was a small part of my life now, with brief, argument-free visits thanks to the boundaries I set after the Grant Park birthday party. I thought my story was complete, that I'd found peace, but then an unexpected email from a Chicago women's organization changed everything. They invited me to speak at a women's empowerment conference at the Chicago Cultural Center. Me? On a stage? I nearly declined, thinking I had nothing remarkable to share. But then I remembered those nights crying in my old apartment, feeling invisible, and the moment I stood up at O'Hare Airport, choosing myself. If my story could help even one person, I had to try. On the conference day, I wore my favorite navy dress, standing before about 100 women, heart pounding. I told it all. From years living in Sarah's shadow, to the disastrous Michigan Lake getaway, to my defiance at O'Hare when I flew to Maui. I spoke of leaving home, building a life from scratch, and learning to love myself. "I didn't betray my family," I said, voice trembling but clear. "I chose myself because I deserve to live, not just exist." The crowd clapped, some wiping tears. I stepped down, legs still shaky, but feeling like I'd shed a weight. After the talk, a young woman, maybe 20, approached me, eyes red. Her name was Lily, and she shared how her family pressured her to do everything, from babysitting siblings to abandoning her art school dreams. "Hearing you, I realized I don't have to keep enduring," she said, voice choking. "I just called a friend to crash with so I can leave. Thank you, Emmy." I hugged her, tears streaming, not from sadness, but because I saw myself in Lily, the girl who once thought she had no choice. I left the conference, stepping onto Chicago's streets, the cool breeze brushing past. I never imagined my story, full of tears and anger, could touch someone. I'm no hero, no famous speaker, just Emmy, a woman who learned to stand up. But in that moment, I realized that by daring to live true to yourself, you don't just change your life. You can spark a light for others, like Lily, like anyone feeling invisible. Back in my apartment, I opened the window, letting the city's twinkling lights fill the room, and smiled. I'd come so far, and now I knew I wasn't just living for myself, but for those searching for a way out of the dark, like I once did. Looking back on my journey, I, Emmy, still can't believe how far I've come. From the invisible girl in our Lincoln Park, Chicago home, always standing in Sarah's dazzling shadow, I've become a woman living true to herself. Those years working myself ragged at the Italian diner, studying in a cramped apartment, babysitting until I had no life left. They once made me think I'd never break free. The disastrous Michigan Lake getaway, the bold defiance at O'Hare Airport when I flew to Maui, and the moments I stood up to Mom, Dad, and Sarah to set boundaries. They didn't just change my life. They taught me lessons I want to share with you, whoever's listening to this story. The first lesson is that you don't need family, friends, or anyone else to define your worth. I used to think I had to do everything to uphold family spirit, sacrificing my dreams so Sarah, Ethan, and Noah could have it easier. But I learned that loving your family doesn't mean erasing yourself. If you're feeling crushed by expectations, watching siblings doing chores, or giving up dreams to please others, pause. Ask yourself, who am I living for? If it's not you, it's time to set boundaries. Saying no doesn't make you selfish. It makes you someone who loves themselves. The second lesson is that independence comes at a cost, but the reward is worth more than anything. When I left home, losing my parents' financial support, I was terrified, sleeping on Mia's couch, working grueling shifts. They weren't easy, but each hard step led me to my Andersonville apartment, to the advertising job I love, to marathons that make me feel alive. Freedom isn't free, but it gives you a life where you're in the driver's seat, no one else. So what can you do today? Start small. If family or friends push you into something you don't want, try saying, I need time for myself. Find a trusted friend to confide in, or write down your feelings to clarify your needs. If you're chasing a dream, college, a new career, or just a day to yourself, make a plan even if it's one tiny step. I did it, and Lily, the girl I met at the conference, is doing it. You can too. Standing in Grant Park watching Ethan and Noah play, or speaking to hundreds of women at the Chicago Cultural Center, I realized something. Life isn't about choosing between family and yourself. You can love both, but only if you put yourself first. Today, take a minute to ask, what life do I deserve? Then take a step, even a small one, toward it. I, Emmy, did it. And I believe you can too. Chicago still twinkles outside my window, and I know, whatever comes, I'll live, not just exist.